All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you here this evening for presentations for our post-professional occupational therapy degree. This is first tonight, you're going to hear from Helen Russell, who is a fantastic occupational therapy, who is a therapist in Maine. She's going to talk a lot about mindfulness with an evidence-based intervention that she did in a public school. Anyone who works in a public school knows how hard it is to do research inside the walls of a public school. And this, she managed to do 36 participants in a public school environment in a matter of about 12 to 13 weeks. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, and floor is yours. We'll do questions at the end.
Okay. Hello. So my research study is entitled Efficacy of a Mindfulness-Based Intervention in Schools with a Clinical Population, and my faculty mentor was Dr. Hampel. All right. So this was a pilot study specifically of the Common Alert Mindfulness and Yoga Intervention, and the lovely author of this protocol is actually here, which is Helene McLaughlin. I'm not sure what that background noise is, not for me. In any case, so Helene McLaughlin is here. She actually gave me permission to use that intervention. And I did apply it to 2 schools, and you'll hear more about that in a little bit. And I was looking at whether or not that would provide positive change to vulnerable student populations, specifically those with anxiety, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, or learning disabilities. So as many of you probably know, either because you have children or if you work with children, stress, depression, anxiety are on the rise in the pediatric population, and that rose even more significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're also seeing more diagnoses of ADHD and also anxiety. There's emerging evidence within the last 10 years that mindfulness-based interventions support people that have those symptoms. They've been primarily focused on adults. However, there's emerging literature now for children. There's still scant literature for clinical populations, but that is emerging as well. And I just briefly want to give a definition of mindfulness, just in case you're not aware. And this is usually the definition that you'll see in evidence-based literature from Bishop and Bear. Mindfulness entails focusing on one's present bodily sensations, thoughts, feelings, and the key here is that it's in a judgment-free manner. Right. So there are lots of benefits that you can receive from mindfulness, especially for executive function, looking at emotional regulation, behavior regulation, and cognitive regulation. Also in reducing aggressive behaviors, improved interoceptive sensitivity, and resilience to stress, and just overall well-being. A lot of the research that's been focused on pediatric populations has used subjective measures from teacher, peer, and parent reports. But there is a push to really triangulate that data with objective measures. But there is not as much research that looks at that. We are seeing that there are improvements in things like impulse control and attention. And I'm going to more specifically go into what evidence there is for the populations that I'm interested in now. So because of who I have in the audience, I'm not going to focus so much on the challenges that those populations face. I'm mostly going to focus on what the literature shows us for what mindfulness can do for those populations in the interest of time. So there is not a lot of evidence for autistics in general for what mindfulness does, even for adults, but there was a meta-analysis actually this year from Loftus in 2023, and it showed that mindfulness-based interventions decrease aggressive behaviors and improve social skills. For the pediatric ADHD population, mindfulness-based interventions can improve all core features, and it's specifically is helpful for those that have the greatest degree of difficulties in attentional challenges and impulse control difficulties. Part of what made me laugh in the systematic review for that was that it suggested to provide the intervention when students are in a calm or mildly dysregulated state, which I think would apply for probably any child, but also that can be challenging in the school environment, as many of you know, because of either scheduling or just in general being able to offer that intervention during that time. Both for ADHD and autism, the literature that's out there also offers a lot of suggestions on how to offer those interventions. And specifically for autistics, adaptations are very important. So honoring sensory processing needs. So for example, perhaps having natural lighting or dimming the lighting and using concrete language and using props to support learning. For students that may have experienced trauma or ACEs, they may not be identified as having emotional disturbance and have an IEP. However, I still wanted to include students that had a diagnosis of anxiety because it's so prevalent, as I previously mentioned, and it impacts so many different things from social participation, and it can also impact academic performance. And there are studies that show that mindfulness-based interventions can support these populations with both executive function and social skills. And it has the biggest effects in the adolescent population. The least amount of literature was available for students with learning disabilities. But what we do know is that students with learning disabilities, including dyslexia, they're at increased risk for trauma and social difficulties. And mindfulness-based interventions can address both the symptoms of those and also improve social difficulties. And the studies that do exist that address mindfulness-based interventions for students with dyslexia, they showed that there's improvements in emotional and behavioral regulation, and also that they can address some of the cognitive regulation factors and also decrease aggressive, also improve social skills behaviors. So lastly, emotional behavioral disorders, all of these populations are at risk of having those, and the studies that address that particular symptom that can be involved in many different populations, that addresses all of the different executive function challenges can be improved from mindfulness-based interventions and decreases aggressive behaviors. Right. So the main question I wanted to answer is, would I see from using the Calm and Alert protocol, would I see significant changes in executive and social dysfunction between pre and post test? And I was specifically looking at behavioral regulation, emotional regulation, and prosocial behavior. So this was a quasi-experimental study. I was randomizing by classroom rather than participant. While the schools are pre-K through 8th grade, I only was looking at ages 5 through 13. I provided an in-service to the teachers prior to that. Was partially to get buy-in. The teachers actually were invaluable in helping me get the participants that I got. And it helped to also get carryover of the skills. Students were identified with the diagnoses, and then I got parental consent. And then, as I mentioned previously, I randomized it, but that was done via hat draw. And then the hat draw was for the classrooms themselves. So each school has one classroom per grade. And so from a hat, it was by grade for the school, who would get the intervention and who would be in the waitlist control group. With the exception of the middle schoolers, because that particular school, they told me the middle school would be combined because they offered me the study hall period. So I had 4 study participants and then 8 general population students as part of that. So I did end up with 36 participants, but because of the amount of pre-assessments I received and because of a couple of other factors, I ended up at the beginning of the assessment with 34 participants. And you'll see later at the end, I ended up with 33, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So my end result was 33, but at the pre-assessment, I had 34. And my mean age was roughly 9 years. I had ages 5 through 13. The majority of my participants had a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or specific learning disability or dyslexia. Being in Maine, we don't have a lot of ethnic diversity to begin with, and these schools don't have a lot of ethnic diversity. So one school, the entire study participants were Caucasian, but overall I had 91% were Caucasian, and then the other 9% were either African American or Latina. So this intervention was provided via response to intervention tier 1, which meant that I came into the classroom and I provided it to all of the students. I'm certified in mindfulness. I'm a certified mindfulness informed professional. That was also part of the systematic reviews that I read. It's important for whoever's facilitating to be trained in mindfulness. That ensures long-term effects and also greater effect sizes. The reasoning behind having the clinical population embedded within the general population was for social inclusion benefits. A lot of these study participants are special needs students, and so they're already at risk for both social and academic exclusion. So this was done with intention that they would receive the intervention alongside the other peers in their classroom. Some students received the intervention in their main classroom. Others received it during their PE block. And then, as I told you, the middle schoolers, they received it during study hall. And we sometimes held it outside, and we sometimes held it in just a free classroom. So there was some variation there. That was just based on scheduling. That wasn't necessarily by design. Each class had a similar structure. So I followed the Common Alert Protocol that was in the book for the kindergarten through 5th grade. I followed it exactly, and then I modified it for middle school, which I'll discuss in a second. But for kindergarten through 5th grade, it has a similar structure. There's songs, breathing, warm-ups, yoga poses, mindful games, and rest involving meditation. And so the familiarity, I think, added to like having a nice routine each week that the students grew to really understand and know. These are the lessons that they had. So, oops, I don't know what happened. Oh, where did that go? All right. So these are the 6 lessons. Began with respect. Then there was a lesson on calm, alert, learning time, transition time, and social time. So the last 3 lessons, those are the 3 main times that you have in school. But we also discussed how that could be involved in home or community, and they all built on each other. For the middle schoolers, in lieu of the games and the songs, we spent more time on the postures and really processing the mindfulness exercises, and it was more collaborative in nature. So the outcome measures and assessments I used, I picked reliable and valid measures, the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. It has good retest reliability for 4 to 6 months, and I use the pro-social behavior subscale specifically from this, and only the teacher form. There are student forms for kids 12 and older, and there's also parent forms, but I use the teacher form. And it's 25 questions, and 5 of those questions are related to pro-social behavior. The head, toe, knee, shoulders task, you may not have heard of. It's for research purposes only. It is there are multiple studies and evidence-based literature that use it. It looks at behavioral aspects of self-regulation. So I included this so that I could triangulate that with the results that I had from the behavior rating inventory of executive function. The head, toe, knee, shoulders task, though, is for ages 3.5 to 8. You can use it for older children if they don't reach the ceiling, which has a maximum score of 118. So I did use it for some of the 9-year-olds. So I use it for kindergarten through 3rd grade. For the statistical analysis, especially because I was comparing, because I randomized by classroom, it was important for me to know that the groups, both the intervention and control groups, were comparable at pretest. And in order to do that, I used independent t-test for the continuous variables, and then for the binary and other background variables, I use the Fisher exact test, which is a good test also for small sample sizes such as mine. And they were not significantly different, which was good. And I used ANCOVAs for comparing pre and post tests for the SDQ, as well as the brief 2 results. And I was able to do that because it met all of the criteria for that, including homogeneity of variance. However, the HTKS, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but I had to use the Mann-Whitney U test to compare that. For ANCOVAs and for so ANCOVAs are recommended for RCTs to increase the statistical power, but also for these type of studies where you're randomizing by classroom, it's really important to also look at effect sizes, because you can tend to have overly inflated statistical significance. So it was important for me to also report on the partial eta squared. So I wanted to include this here. So you can see that the large effect size is 0.14 and the medium effect size is 0.06. So those will come into play in a second. So overall, I saw significant positive changes in behavioral regulation, emotional regulation, cognitive regulation, and prosocial behavior. So that the different regulation factors that was looking at the brief 2 assessment, pre and post test differences, and specifically looking at the T-score differences. So I was looking for those to decrease, because higher T-scores indicate greater dysfunction in those executive function areas. And then for prosocial behavior, I was looking at the SDQ scale. So again, this is a subjective measure that the teacher filled out. And then I saw no significant change in the general executive composite, which is the overall executive function score from the brief 2 that was filled out by the teacher. And I also did not see significant change from the head, toe, knee, shoulders task for self-regulation. So here on this table, these are my ANCOVA results. So as I told you previously, I started off with 34 participants, and I ended up with 33. So one of my students missed substantial portions of the intervention, and that particular student then had to be excluded because that was one of my exclusion criteria. So I ended up with 33, 18 were in the mindfulness group, 15 in the control. You can see from this trend that all of these areas of the intervention group saw positive changes in the mean difference. And if you look at the control group in the mean difference scores, we saw the opposite. Over here, you have my p-values. So we have statistically significant differences, like I said, in the behavioral, emotional, and cognitive regulation differences. They were less than 0.05. And in the prosocial behavior, we have actually very significant. We have 0.001. And we have moderate effect sizes for all of those, the behavioral, cognitive, and emotion regulation indices, but we have large effect size for the prosocial behavior. So for the head, toe, knee, shoulders test of self-regulation, I did see for both the mindfulness and control group, the mean and median scores improved for both of them. You'll remember perhaps that the highest score that they could obtain was 118, and I show you the range of scores there. So we have quite a spread especially at baseline for the control group. You'll see that I had quite less students in the control group as well. Now, the reason why I had to use the Mann-Whitney, I did not have a normal distribution. These are the results from the Mann-Whitney. Since I was looking for either a positive or negative shift, I used the one-tailed sig, and it was not significant. So overall, we see that there are improvements to some of the common challenges that these vulnerable populations face, and this is an intervention that can be embedded into the classroom and can potentially help these students. And it uses a least restrictive environment and inclusion model for these students. But there are some important temporal context and physical environment factors that we need to take into account. I discussed already some of the scheduling difficulties. So it's really dependent on whoever is facilitating the course and what the teachers are available to provide when you're able to offer it. So even though the literature suggests that for many students, it's beneficial to offer in the morning or right after lunch or right before a transition, that's not always going to be available either to you or the teacher might need that time for their own academic needs. The students might also have, or the students or teachers might have other preferences. The other problem I encountered is I really wanted to have carryover from the teachers, but the teachers had competing needs as well. I only had 2 teachers that were able to really participate. I did have 4 educational technicians that whenever they were available, they were very involved. And I had 2 special education teachers that also, when they were there, they were also very involved. But it was really hit or miss if teachers were able to be involved. Those of you that are in Maine are probably aware there was a mass shooting that occurred during week 4 of the study. I'm not sure how that impacted my results. What we know from the literature is that children that have emotional regulation difficulties, they, even if they are not part of the community where the shooting occurred, which we were not, we were an hour from there. But what happened in our area was the manhunt was taking place. And so all of the schools that were in the area, they were canceled. So that happened then on a Wednesday night. So that Thursday, those 2 schools that were involved, they were canceled. And then the Friday after that, schools resumed, but about 30% of the students did not attend school that day. And one of my classes was supposed to occur that Thursday, and it didn't. And my class that occurred that Friday, I was missing some students likely because of what was going on. And since we know that some of my students had difficulties with emotional regulation at baseline, I don't know if perhaps there was some impact to them. We discussed some of the difficulties with scheduling. There's also difficulties with the physical environment. So I didn't have the same space with different classes. With being able to do it in the main classroom, you have less transitions, which is a plus, but you also have less space. The gym was an expansive space, but had multiple distractions, both visual and auditory. That also decreased the replicability and generalizability, the fact that I had different times of the day and different spaces. This was also a regional study with limited ethnic diversity, and I had multiple populations, multiple age groups, multiple classrooms. My sample size was quite small, and I didn't have an active control group. I really wanted to triangulate the data, but that was very difficult because the objective measure I used was not for all ages. So that's something that would be helpful to use an objective measure that would span all the ages that you're studying. And I wanted to also look at behavioral incidents, and I didn't realize that one of the schools did not track behavioral incidents, so I wasn't able to triangulate that data. The teachers were not blinded to who was in either group, so that introduced bias. And by me being the facilitator and the researcher, there was bias there as well. And using the subjective reports introduced rater bias. These are some areas that I think would be great to study in the future, examining the specific clinical population. So having studies on the autistic population or ADHD, or adding literature to specific learning disability or dyslexics, examining specific stages of development rather than a large age range. And as mentioned before, triangulating the data using self-rating forms and objective data. And then when possible, if you can randomize by participant, which is very difficult in the school environment. If you are randomizing by classroom, in order to make it a robust study, you need about 40 schools, which is very difficult. All right. In conclusion, this is an evidence-based practice that can be embedded in the public school, and it's within the scope of practice of OT. But in order to be able to do that, the OT would need to seek out some extra either continuing education or get some sort of training in order to be able to provide it effectively. It's best in order to get buy-in and also to get carryover to provide an in-service to the teachers and really explain why it's important for them to be involved in the intervention, and if possible to really strive to have those small groups for the populations that really benefit from that. And if you are able to track behavioral data, I think that would be a fantastic way to really know whether or not those the subjective ratings are valid. I have a lot of people that I would not have been able to do this without. So thank you so much, Helene McLaughlin, for letting me use Common Alerts. I would not have been able to do this without you, and I love your protocol and will continue to use it with the students for years to come. And thank you, Dr. Hampel. And then I am forever grateful for the two schools for bending over backwards and helping me get the participants. I am so sorry that I went probably over time, but thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me?
You didn't go over time. There's still five or so minutes left. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them. And obviously, if we go a few minutes over here, it's okay. So if anyone has questions, I'd invite them. They're welcome to just raise their hand and speak. They're welcome to just unmute and speak, or they're welcome to put it in the chat, and I'll be happy to moderate that. So any questions in the room?
Helen, this is Steve. That was awesome. And I just was curious, did the teachers give you any subjective feedback on the process? That maybe wasn't part of your data, but just subjective feedback?
In what way? Like in terms of the study itself, like having to fill out the forms, or in terms of the intervention, or both?
In terms of the intervention, mostly. Just
yeah, that's interesting, because some of them were so like the one that was involved in the PE, like she has no idea about it at all because she wasn't there. But the ones that were actually in the classroom, yeah, they loved it, and they gave good feedback. For me, it was frustrating because I really wanted all of the teachers to kind of see it, even though that was also nerve-wracking for me. But the ones that were in the classroom when I provided it, they all gave good feedback on the protocol itself. As in terms of, Dr. Hampel knows this, I gave a lot more assessments than what's in the presentation, which was a mistake of mine for sure. I would not have done that. What I wanted to do was really triangulate a bunch of data. So I had self-rating forms for other things. I did do the SDQ for the older students, and I had a mindfulness measure and various other things. And I think that was, the teachers they only had the SDQ and the brief, and that wasn't a problem for them. But I think I had too much data to interpret myself. But some of the teachers, it was really hard to get the assessments back. And I don't really know why that was, because the brief I had them do online. And the SDQ is a paper form, and it's really quick. It's just one page. Did that answer your
So-
question?
Yes, thank you.
So you have a question in here from the chat that says, since mindfulness can be abstract concepts, did you experience any challenges with younger students? And then she compliments your presentation.
Yes, so that was one of my fears too, because my experience with mindfulness had been pretty abstract. No. So that's one of the great things about this protocol is I brought some of the props because I was hoping that like if let me unblur mine, or I guess you can see it if I hold it close to me. So this is one of the things that was carried throughout the thing. So this is clear thoughts and muddy thoughts. That's another thing that was in the recommendations. I think it was in the autism literature specifically, but maybe it was in other literature as well, to have visuals. And so this was one of the things that's in the Common Alert protocol. And I think that really helped a lot of the students. And so there wasn't a lot of I can't think of anything. So at the end, there's a rest story. And so maybe some of that was a little abstract, because I know that there was one rest story where they became an eagle, and another where they shot off and became a star. And maybe for some students that would have been a little bit abstract, but other than the rest stories, I don't think any of it was. And the visuals really helped. There's a light switch. There were different props. Some of them carried through each lesson, like the clear and muddy thoughts. And then other props were different each week. But I think because there were so many visuals to help understand some of the things that were metaphorical, there wasn't really a problem. And I had, it really surprised me how many students really bought into it. And the only age group that really struggled at first was 5th grade. And it was really 3 students, and they weren't even participants in the study. And I ended up contacting Helene because I'm so used to working in small groups. I'm used to being able to adapt to get students on board. But I ended up winning those students over too. They didn't really want to play the games at first. I think they were too cool for school, but they ended up enjoying it as well by the end of it. So yeah, no, it's really meant for that age group. And the great thing about her curriculum too is on her website, she has videos of her doing it. So I was able to watch it and then practice it with my husband and son the week prior before I gave the course or gave the lesson.
Are there any other questions?
I do have a question, Helen. That was amazing. This is going to go big places, so thank you for sharing. My question is a little bit more broad, I would say, and maybe kind of selfishly so. But can you tell me a little bit about how you got admin to buy in?
I didn't really have a problem. I mean, I don't know, maybe because I work for such small schools, but I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do to begin with, because I work PRN at a mental health facility, also an adult mental health facility. And so I kind of had an idea that this is what I wanted to do. So and towards the end of the school year, I reached out to the special ed director and just asked her, and she didn't respond to my email. So then the next time I saw her at an IEP meeting, I asked her, and she's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And so then during the summer, I emailed her and the 2 principals, and they both were on board. And the only thing that I got kind of maybe weird feedback from was one of the principals told me that one of the things used too is the Zen. Oh, sorry, I keep having to hold things close to me. Was the Zen chime, and he told me the word Zen might make some of the parents not sign the consent form, but the word Zen wasn't in any of the consent forms anyway. But he wasn't saying that because he had an issue with it. He just, I guess, had encountered some people that were against mindfulness. But my 2 principles I feel like they're very evidence-based. So I didn't have any problem. And I think also because I gave the in-service, they were on board. And I tried to make it as like, I will accommodate whatever. And we have a long-term substitute in PE at one of the schools anyway, and they offer PE 4 times a week. So that made it kind of easy to schedule for one of the classes where the teacher couldn't give me any time slot.
Gotcha. Great. All right. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you one more before we move on to Felicia. And what do you want to do with this moving forward? Because I'm not like, I'm listening to you, and I've had a long, like, I've been working with you for a while, and I'm not sure you're getting the gravity of how amazing it is that you were able to do a randomized control trial in a public school with it in this amount of time. Like, this, your work is very impressive. And so what's your next hope and dream with it?
I definitely want to do one that's more, now I realize like study design flaws. So I want to do one I would like to do one that incorporates other schools and maybe in other regions, but also more specific age groups or more specific populations. And I don't think that I would use this protocol again with the middle schoolers, because I had to adapt it. So that wasn't, I don't know, that I feel like I just learned a lot just in general about like, I definitely am a novel researcher, because I learned so much from just doing the experience. And I had made an assumption that both schools tracked behavioral data, and that was
Incorrect.
crazy that one school didn't. And then all of the special education teachers were from that school were like, we wish we did. And so they've asked me to talk to the principal now about tracking it. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, this just opened like all sorts of ideas and thoughts. And I'm definitely,
well, you could so take like 30 days to celebrate that you've finished this part, and then decide what you want to do with it next. So
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I'm going to stop recording for this one and switch over to